The world is affected by a virus, and a lockdown has been initiated, forcing everyone to live remotely and be as lonely as you on a Friday night. However, for our boy Kanata, his situation is quite different because he is living his best life, crammed in an apartment with the school's hottest chick. How did this all happen, you ask? Well, it all started 3 days ago in the month of April, during the second year of school, when Kanata returned to the dorm after the day's lecture. Suddenly, he was told by the old janitor that a student had been infected, so the dorm had been locked until further notice for disinfection. Next, the janitor explained that all students had been informed a day earlier and asked to evacuate the dorm. But Kanata didn't get the memo because he was at the computer room in school doing his usual nerdy stuff. Scared of being stranded, Kanata immediately called his mom at home, asking if he could return, but his mom on the phone insisted he stay back, explaining she was scared he might have been exposed to infection. Then, Kanata tried calling his pals to see if anyone could accommodate him, but they all refused, claiming their parents were also afraid he could expose them to the infection and wished him good luck. Confused about what to do next, Kanata tried the cafe, for only God knows why, but the receptionist informed him that students weren't allowed to use the facility at that point in time. Frustrated, Kanata decided to book a hotel, but after seeing the price, he chose to sleep on a bench at the park instead. That's when he spotted Haruka, the prettiest chick in all of Manga. The two locked eyes but immediately looked away, like typical Gen Zs. Suddenly, Kanata noticed the girl shaking her phone in the air like a mental patient, shocking him. Before he could even react, the girl shouted, "Yes," like some asylum escapee. Startled and now on full alert, Kanata stood up from the bench, wondering if he should run for his life or something. Just then, Haruka asked if he was Kanata from class 2, explaining that she didn't recognize him earlier because of the face mask. Kanata confirmed he was, but then he realized that Haruka had this happy expression on her face, like she had just won the jackpot. Next, Haruka asked why he was sleeping outside like some hobo, and when Kanata started explaining the dorm situation, the girl kept interrupting him by saying she was aware. However, Kanata finally powered through and explained that some idiot got infected, so the dorm got shut down. Haruka, confused, asked why he didn't just go home instead, to which Kanata explained that his deadbeat mom was scared he had been exposed to the infection. After that, Haruka revealed she had come to the park to catch a Wi-Fi and put it in her bag, leaving Kanata shocked. To clarify, Haruka, with full confidence, explained that since it was announced in school that they wouldn't be attending physical classes starting next week, only online from home, she thought it smart to catch the Wi-Fi and take it home. However, Kanata, still trying to process her level of brain fog, immediately explained to the chicken-brained girl that the public Wi-Fi could only be used around the park. Furthermore, Kanata advised that it was best she got an internet connection at home so she could link it with all her devices. But then, Haruka confessed she was bad with tech and machines, and then begged that since Kanata was a member of the computer club and quite tech-savvy, she wanted him to teach her. Upon hearing this, Kanata couldn't believe that the first time the school Barbie would ever talk to him, it would be to ask for his help. Nevertheless, Kanata agreed. So, Haruka suggested he come over to her crib and set it up, explaining that it was just a 5-minute walk from the park, to which Kanata instantly agreed. After walking a few minutes, they finally arrived at her crib, and upon stepping inside, Kanata was amazed at how luxurious and cozy the apartment was. Haruka immediately took off her face mask, and Kanata's soul nearly left him just from seeing how dang pretty this chick was. Getting down to business, Haruka mentioned that the computer was in her room, but feeling uneasy, Kanata asked about her parents, to which Haruka revealed she lived alone, shocking Kanata. Upon entering the bedroom, Kanata realized the room smelled so nice, unlike his dorm, which smelled worse than a pig's beehole. Just then, Haruka showed Kanata her laptop that needed to be set up, but as Kanata moved to get the laptop, Haruka, feeling embarrassed, immediately blocked his path. Kanata, instantly realizing what's up, asked if she was scared of him seeing her sus search history, and suggested it was best she dealt with it first before handing the laptop to him. After a brief awkward moment, Haruka let him through, so Kanata took hold of the laptop, did his geeky thing, and the whole time, Haruka was flustered with embarrassment. When he was done, Kanata informed Haruka that next time she wouldn't need his help to set it up since the laptop would just connect automatically. With that, Haruka thanked him for his help, but just as he was about to leave, Haruka suddenly grabbed his hand. She requested that, since it was already late, he spend the night instead of returning to the park, noting she lived alone and had a spare room. However, Kanata sadly rejected the offer, explaining that he didn't want to overstay his welcome. Desperate, Haruka screamed, reminding him that she was hopeless with tech and would need his help with other techie stuff beyond Wi-Fi. When Haruka doubled down, saying remote classes were starting soon and she would need all the help she could possibly find to get ready, Kanata asked if he could really stay at her apartment. Still grabbing hold of his hand, Haruka happily said he could. With that, it was settled. But then, here is the plot twist in this story. In fact, it wasn't a coincidence that Haruka bumped into Kanata in the park. It had all been her master plan all along. Moreover, Haruka never struggled with tech. She was actually good at it. Additionally, she didn't go to the park to catch Wi-Fi. She went there to catch Kanata instead. And because she was wearing a mask, Kanata never noticed that she had been smiling the whole time. See, their first ever meeting wasn't at the park. It was actually at the school entrance ceremony. Back then, Haruka had phone issues, and Kanata happened to pass by, so she asked for his help, complaining that her phone wasn't connecting to the internet. Kanata, being the tech lord, agreed to help, so she handed the phone to him, and while watching him do his thing, Haruka got all emotional, seeing how reliable he was. When Kanata was done, he returned the phone to her with a smile and then asked if she was planning on enrolling in the school, to which Haruka replied yes. With that, Kanata remarked that if she needed any of her gadgets fixed again, she should feel free to ask him anytime. Haruka replied that she would, but from that day onward, Haruka instantly fell in love with Kanata. But when they met again in class, she couldn't tell Kanata how she felt because Kanata was never into girls and was always with his phone. Even so, she had always found his riz irresistible, but just didn't know how to approach him. All she could do was fantasize about his gaze, the touch of his hand, and his reactions to her words. Finally, back in the present, her plan worked, and now she had the irresistible stuff right in her apartment. Lying on her bed, all Haruka thought about was how she longed to touch Kanata. She got flustered just thinking Kanata might touch her, being so close to her. Then, realizing Kanata was a shy nerd too dense to make the first move, Haruka determined that starting the following day, she was commencing operation, getting closer to Kanata. The following morning, Kanata woke up feeling something soft pressed against him. Man thought he was in heaven until he opened his eyes and saw Haruka snoozing beside him with her cleavage shining bright. Shocked, Kanata jerked from the bed, and when he demanded to know what Haruka was doing in his room, she reminded him that he was actually in her house. However, Haruka apologized for sleeping on the bed with him, claiming she had been sleepwalking and had entered the wrong room. To make up for her mistake, Haruka promised to prepare breakfast for him and then left the room. Left alone, all Kanata could think about was waking up with Haruka's marshmallows in his hands. Trying to shake off the intrusive thoughts, Kanata noticed some folded boys' clothes on the shelf, and since Haruka lived alone, he began to wonder if it belonged to her sugar daddy. This made Kanata connect the dot that Haruka was one of them hoes that belonged to the street. A few minutes later, Kanata headed downstairs and found Haruka attempting to make breakfast, so he offered to assist her. During this, Kanata complimented Haruka on her cooking skills, to which she responded that since she lived alone, it was only natural she'd learn to cook. But then, Kanata questioned how she managed to use the kitchen appliances, given her supposed ineptitude with machines, and asked if she could at least handle the stove and microwave. But Haruka replied with a lie, insisting she couldn't. At that moment, Kanata noticed the rice cooker was on, with rice boiling inside, and when he asked how she'd managed to turn on the appliance, Haruka capped even harder, claiming sheer determination had made it work, before pleading with him to teach her how to use the rice cooker. With that, Kanata began by showing her the on switch, but Haruka claimed she couldn't see it clearly and asked him to come closer to demonstrate again. Kanata did just that, but being so close to a girl made him tense, causing his face to flush redder than a YouTube logo. Noticing this, Haruka asked why his face had suddenly turned red, to which Kanata lied, blaming the hot steam from the boiling rice. After preparing the meal, Kanata and Haruka sat down to eat together, and as they ate, Kanata thanked Haruka for providing a place to sleep, food to eat, and even clothes. When Kanata added that he was especially grateful for the clothes she gave him, considering they might belong to her sugar daddy, Haruka froze and then yelled that she didn't have a boyfriend, let alone a sugar daddy. Haruka further clarified that Kanata was the first guy she'd ever allowed into her home. Kanata realized he might have overdone it, so he mumbled an apology, and in an attempt to make amends, he offered to do anything she wanted. After pondering for a moment, Haruka considered asking him to rough her up, but deeming it too desperate, She decided to suggest a date, only to quickly change her mind and ask him to accompany her to shop for groceries so they could cook together. Readily, Kanata agreed and mentioned that he'd take charge of the cooking this time. Delighted by this, Haruka remarked that no matter what he made, she was certain it would be delicious. In reflection, Haruka felt grateful that Kanata's presence had completely distracted her from the dangerous virus ravaging the world. Shortly thereafter, Kanata and Haruka arrived at the supermarket and realized the place was more crowded than a Black Friday sale due to panic buying. After gathering their supplies, Haruka suggested they use the self-checkout service, prompting Kanata to ask in surprise if she could actually operate it. Realizing her scam was in danger, Haruka backtracked faster than a politician and denied that she couldn't. As a result, Kanata decided to teach her how to use the machine. But while explaining, Haruka kept staring at his hot face, making Kanata embarrassed. Kanata then asked if there was dog poop on his face, but Haruka claimed she was just checking if he'd worn his mask correctly. Following this, Haruka whipped out an exclusive black card like some rich kid and stated that she'd cover the payment, which left Kanata stunned. As they headed home after shopping, Kanata couldn't stop glancing around, noticing that the once bustling city now lay empty and felt more like a zombie movie. Haruka noticed he was looking around suspiciously like a crook and asked if he had a place in mind he would like to stop by. In response, Kanata said he'd like to give her a treat as a thank you for all she'd done, but he noticed every shop was closed. Haruka said she understood and then suggested they had a home cafe instead, to which Kanata agreed. While crossing the road, Kanata also taught Haruka how to use the pedestrian button. And as they walked home, Kanata began making excuses in his head for why Haruka was so useless with techs and machines. However, his brain cells finally clicked when they reached home, and he asked Haruka to press the elevator button, only for her to lie once more, claiming she didn't know how to. At that instant, Kanata started to suspect she'd been faking her tech troubles all along. Recalling clearly, Kanata remembered that on the first day he'd arrived, Haruka had pressed the elevator button without issue, which led him to conclude that Haruka was just playing him for a fool. When Haruka noticed the awkward way Kanata stared at her, she fell silent, wondering what was up. Nevertheless, Kanata simply thanked her again for her help, though deep down, he burned to know why she'd lied to him. Stepping into the apartment, Kanata pondered what Haruka could possibly gain by pretending to be bad with machines. He speculated that perhaps she craved attention so badly she'd lie to lure any guy into her home. But then, Kanata wondered why Haruka had chosen him specifically and briefly assumed she might have feelings for him, only to dismiss it as absurd and unlikely. Still, he couldn't shake the thought that, truly, Haruka might actually harbor some affection for him. The next day, Kanata checked on the school and realized it was still closed. However, that wasn't the real reason he left home. In truth, he was scared of losing his V-card while being alone with Haruka all day. Roaming the empty school like a fugitive, Kanata also noticed the dorms were still locked down. Before security mistook him for a jobless criminal, he decided to bounce. On the way home, it finally hit him, and Kanata realized that the pandemic had turned the world upside down. Just as he arrived home, he rang the doorbell, and Haruka hurriedly opened the door with a flustered smile, free cleavage view, and wide hands to greet him, startling Kanata for a moment. Noticing his tired expression, Haruka asked if anything was wrong, but Kanata brushed off her concern and said he'd take a bath instead. When Haruka suggested they make dinner together after his bath, Kanata quickly agreed, though everything still felt like a dream to him. The fact that he was living with Haruka, the school's drop-dead gorgeous girl, during the pandemic. Lost in thought, Kanata barely registered when Haruka asked what kind of food he'd like for dinner, as he was too deep in his thinking to respond. For he was dying to know why Haruka pretended to be bad with machines and tech. Yet, even if he craved the truth, he wouldn't push it. After all, he was smart enough to realize he wouldn't risk knowing the truth for the joy of living with the class beauty in a luxurious mansion with 5-star meals 3 times a day. Thus, he'd simply have to turn a blind eye. Moreover, Kanata understood that to keep enjoying this paradise, he mustn't say or do anything to offend this angel who had blessed him. Suddenly, Kanata randomly picked up underwear from the ground and stared at it in amazement like he had just found his purpose in life. But he quickly realized that since Haruka was the only female in the house, it most definitely belonged to her. Just as he decided to put it back, Haruka spotted her peach cover in his hand and called him a filthy degenerate. Immediately, Kanata threw himself on the floor and began apologizing as if his life depended on it, fully aware that offending Haruka could mean eviction from the paradise he cherished. Surprisingly, no, Haruka wasn't even mad. Instead, she squatted in front of him, all cute and innocent, telling him not to be scared. Kanata, trying to be a good boy, was about to thank her until he looked up and saw the twins up close. He freaked out and confessed on the spot, blurting out that he may have stolen a glance at her bouncy asset, too, prompting Haruka to cover her babies with her hands from his cultured eyes. Still, Haruka admitted she didn't mind his eyes wandering over her. Since it was him, she'd allow it. Gratefully, Kanata thanked her and promised to be extra careful from then on. With that, he rushed to take his bath to avoid causing more trouble for himself. Just as Kanata left, Haruka grew tense and nervous, recalling that she'd deliberately dropped the underwear for Kanata to find just to mess with his mind. Sunday arrived, and while watching TV on the couch like normal human beings, Haruka drew abnormally close to Kanata, even as the rest of the world observed social distancing. Suddenly, Haruka whined about her phone screen going blank, and though Kanata knew she was lying again, he offered to fix it for her. As he worked on it, Haruka leaned even closer, claiming she wanted to watch him do his nerdy thing. After fixing the phone under great stress, Kanata handed it back, and Haruka thanked him. However, less than 2 minutes later, she demanded his help again for another emergency, this time to fix the hot water that wouldn't flow. Resignedly, Kanata decided to become her handyman, too, and as he moved to check it, Haruka grabbed his hand, insisting hers was cold and needed his warmth. Shortly after fixing the hot water, Haruka called for his help once more, now to fix the bathroom light that mysteriously wouldn't turn on. Left with no choice, Kanata went to investigate, and when Haruka leaned close behind him, Kanata figured that the girl was using her tech illiteracy as an excuse to cling to him whenever possible. Yet, all this time, he'd been restraining his inner cultured man, resisting the urge to pin her down and make finger love to her. The torture was unbearable for Kanata, so while fixing the bathroom light, he resolved that to protect his sanity and the enjoyment of living in her house, he'd need to put as much distance between them as possible. Later, while taking her bath that evening, Haruka began wondering why Kanata had been avoiding her. She realized that since the bathroom incident, whenever she tried talking to him, he distanced himself and hurried back to his room. Pondering further, Haruka wondered if her clinginess and impulsive actions had caused Kanata to dislike her. So, the next morning, while chilling in the sitting room, Haruka, unable to hold back, asked Kanata if she'd done something wrong, to which Kanata cluelessly replied that she hadn't. Still, Haruka pressed on, saying she felt like he was avoiding her, though she wondered if it was all in her imagination. Thinking fast, Kanata explained he was just following the 6-foot social distancing rule. But this upset Haruka, who stated she'd never expected him to think he could get infected by being close to her. Anxiously, Kanata clarified that wasn't what he meant, adding he'd even prefer she gave him an infection. In response, Haruka said that if he didn't care about getting infected by her, she'd love to keep being clingy. With that, she drew even closer to him on the couch, though she found it hard to concentrate on anything. Haruka struggled to believe the only guy she'd ever loved was sitting right beside her. She could feel his warmth and smell his scent in 4K. Nevertheless, she knew she had to be careful not to overdo it, lest he grow to hate her. Pretending to scroll through her phone, Haruka reflected on how Kanata was still oblivious to her tech scam. But just then, she received a message informing her that remote classes would resume the next day, instantly putting her on edge about how she'd manage the classes while still keeping up with her lies. At last, it was Monday morning. Kanata woke up that morning to find Haruka getting ready for the start of their online lessons. It was the 3rd day since they began living together, yet Kanata still couldn't stop himself from staring at her lips and certain areas only a degenerate would notice. For example, while they were in the bathroom together, Kanata found his eyes drifting on their own and fixating on Haruka's humongous jiggles. When he realized that Haruka wasn't even wearing any melon armor, Kanata froze and tried not to stare. Moments later, Haruka finished washing her face, and as she attempted to leave the bathroom, she accidentally tripped. Kanata caught her just in time, but his hand landed directly on her forbidden jello and gave a little squeeze. Overwhelmed with embarrassment, Kanata immediately withdrew his hand and apologized, though Haruka assured him it was fine. Just as Haruka exited the bathroom, Kanata berated himself for the incident and prayed she hadn't noticed that his hand instinctively did a little squeezing. Shortly afterwards, the online classes began, and as per school rules, students were required to attend on internet-enabled devices, dressed in their school uniforms, while teachers conducted lessons from the classroom. Suddenly, Haruka asked Kanata if they could take classes together, but Kanata refused, insisting she attend in her room instead to avoid distracting him. Moreover, Kanata understood that if they were caught taking classes together, it could spell serious trouble for Haruka. Thus, Kanata insisted she take classes in her bedroom while he set up in the dining room. Barely minutes into class, the teacher started complaining that Haruka had disappeared from the online session. Kanata began to wonder if she was okay, but then, to his utter shock, he found her sitting beside him. The teacher, noticing Kanata's distraction, asked what was wrong. Thinking fast, Kanata lied, claiming it was a cockroach, and then mentioned he'd be going offline briefly. After closing his laptop, Kanata turned to Haruka and demanded an explanation. Visibly tense, Haruka claimed that her laptop had stopped working. Kanata offered to take a look, but instead of letting him check it at the dining table, Haruka carried the laptop to the central table in the sitting room and asked him to check it there. Approaching the table, Kanata noticed the screen had gone black as if someone had just shut it down on purpose. So, he powered it back on and then mentioned going back to his own table. But then Haruka pulled out the ultimate weapon, puppy eyes, instantly making Kanata realize she wanted him to stay and take the class with her. Reluctantly, Kanaka decided to stay, praying Haruka would remain quiet for a few hours so they wouldn't get caught. But not even 10 minutes later, Haruka poked him, complaining her laptop was acting strange again. Kanata glanced at it and saw the screen had turned off once more, but as he reached to fix it, Haruka blew hot, steamy air into his ear, tickling his senses. Still, Kanata restrained himself from reacting. As if that weren't enough, Haruka decided to play devil's advocate, tickling his hand with her finger and then caressing it, but Kanata struggled to keep his inner demon inside. A few minutes later, the class finally ended, and Kanata could breathe a sigh of relief. While he wondered why Haruka had been tempting him during class, he noticed her smiling with satisfaction. Seeing Kanata wasn't smiling back, Haruka asked if he was mad or disliked her behavior, to which Kanata replied with a no. With a flirty expression, Haruka asked again if he'd truly enjoyed it, but Kanata was lost in the moment, captivated by her cuteness and the beauty of her skin. In that instant, he understood why the simps in their class all had a crush on her and felt a twinge of pride sitting beside such a beauty. Snapping him out of his thoughts, Haruka asked if they could take classes together the next day, just as they had. When she explained it was in case her laptop malfunctioned again, so he could fix it right away, Kanata admitted her suggestion made sense, but then demanded to know if she'd pull any more weird stunts. Feigning innocence, Haruka acted as if she had no idea what he meant, but then, with a sly smirk, she assured him she wouldn't do anything he wouldn't like. With that, Kanata agreed, promising they'd take classes together the next day. The following day, Haruka and Kanata began taking online classes, sitting right next to each other, just as Haruka wanted. Apparently, if Haruka turned off her laptop again, claiming it was faulty, Kanata would be there to assist her with it. Moreover, as long as no one appeared on the other screen or Haruka didn't decide to flirt again, their plan proceeded quite smoothly. Suddenly, the teacher asked a question, and Haruka flexed her brain cells by answering it with the brilliance of a true genius. Meanwhile, Kanata, mesmerized by her voice, yawned loudly without realizing it, alerting the teacher, who demanded to know who made the sound, prompting Kanata to quickly cover his mouth. A few hours later, the morning session concluded, yet Kanata hadn't learned a single thing the teacher taught because he was too distracted, constantly glancing at both his computer screen and Haruka's beautiful busty melons. He tried to focus. He really did, but the way Haruka's clothes rustled and how she simply breathed kept pulling him away from the lesson. Just then, Haruka snapped Kanata out of his thoughts, asking if he'd join her and her friends for lunch via video call. Kanata hesitated, remembering how he was a certified loner with no friends, but then he remembered that the mean girl behind the video call lunch idea was none other than Natsuki, Haruka's friend and his tormentor who had always bullied him in class. Consequently, with this in mind, Kanata declined, suggesting Haruka go ahead and enjoy lunch without him. In response, Haruka pointed out that his refusal was because he hadn't hung out with Natsuki and her other friends and then proposed making an introduction. Although Kanata tried explaining that he just didn't want to, Haruka assured him that spending time with her friends would be fun and even pulled out his portion of the bento he'd have for lunch. After much persistence, Kanata relented and agreed to join the video call lunch. The instant Natsuki spotted Kanata online, she immediately demanded to know why his mug-shaped head was on her webcam. Quickly, Haruka chimed in, explaining that she thought the lunch would be more enjoyable with Kanata, so she had invited him, which made Natsuki shoot a suspicious glance. Knowing that Haruka and Natsuki were polar opposites, like an angel and a demon, Kanata realized it might be wise to disconnect from the video call lunch ASAP. However, before he could, Natsuki demanded to know what relationship Haruka had with Kanata, to which Haruka replied that Kanata was just a friend. Nevertheless, while the girls chatted, Kanata chose to stay silent to avoid drawing too much attention. Both girls continued their conversation, discussing how tired they were of the lockdown and how they longed to meet others and resume school, while Kanata simply chewed his food quietly. The conversation took a wild turn when Natsuki casually asked if Haruka was still living alone. Haruka and Kanata instantly went into panic mode, but Haruka managed to keep her cool and said yes, but Natsuki wasn't buying it. She called Haruka a liar straight to her face and even suggested she come over to keep Haruka company. At that moment, Kanata nearly peed his pants, while Haruka temporarily lost her ability to speak. Later, the class wrapped up for the day, and while heading to their rooms, Kanata brought up the issue of Natsuki visiting, to which Haruka asked if it was okay for her to allow Natsuki to come over. Kanata, in his mind, screamed no, but outwardly, he played it cool and said it was her choice. But he made one thing clear: if Natsuki came over, he was leaving immediately to avoid being a useless nuisance. Also, he stressed that under no circumstances could anyone find out they lived together. Although Haruka wore a disappointed expression, she agreed Kanata was right, and then hinted that it could be their little secret relationship. Still, Haruka asked if she could just tell Natsuki that they lived together, to which Kanata firmly told her not to do so. However, Haruka insisted she'd love to tell Natsuki, and when Kanata asked why, she refused to explain fully, simply noting that she was fine giving Natsuki a clue instead. When Kanata asked if living with both Haruka and Natsuki would be an issue, Haruka reassured him that he wasn't much of a bother to anyone. Touched, Kanata thanked her for her kindness, but Haruka responded with a smile, assuring him that he didn't need to thank her. Afterwards, Haruka entered her room, all giddy that Kanata had thanked her so sincerely. Her face began to blush red as she thought about how much she loved him. Then, raising her hand to the ceiling, she wished she could lie to her friends that she was in a relationship with Kanata. But she understood that revealing they lived together might cause problems. Nevertheless, she reasoned that she could cover it up by lying about their dating. But just thinking about it, Haruka shook her head in disapproval, knowing Kanata might get angry if she did that and could even leave, which was the worst-case scenario since all she really wanted was to be by his side forever. So, with a deep sigh, she sent Natsuki a message, informing her that she wouldn't be able to invite her over. A month passed, and the duo continued their online classes together. During this time, Haruka's flirty provocations never stopped. That morning, right in the middle of the online class, Haruka mentioned that she had accidentally dropped her eraser. As she bent to retrieve it under the table, Kanata decided to act indifferent and then ignored her to avoid getting caught by their clueless teacher. However, just then, he noticed that Haruka was running her hands through his thighs under the table. Given that Haruka's flirty provocations were becoming quite frequent, Kanata had started to suspect that she was doing all this on purpose just to seduce him. Consequently, this made Kanata wonder if, by any chance, Haruka liked him with the way she was acting toward him. Yet, on the other hand, Kanata couldn't figure out what the school's hottest chick would see in a boring cow like him. Ultimately, Kanata decided to brush off the worrying thought and simply live in the moment, enjoying the fact that, while the whole world battled with the virus, he was spending his days cohabitating with the school's beauty. Additionally, Kanata had been joining Haruka and her friends for lunch every day via video call. But then, Natsuki, the witch, had been making his life unbearable. Hours later, at the start of the afternoon class, Kanata was dead tired from boredom and felt sleepy. When Haruka noticed this and asked if he was unwell, Kanata replied that he was tired and not used to taking classes from home. In response, Haruka suggested that he rest his fat head on her thighs, but Kanata froze in shock upon hearing this. Sensing his hesitation, Haruka teasingly asked if he wanted to slide his head under her plot armor and sniff something near her coochie. But Kanata responded that he was fine and would just sleep on the sofa instead during the break, to which Haruka retorted that she wouldn't let him sleep on her couch. Kanata then asked if he could sleep on the bed, but Haruka refused, clearly stating that only her thighs were available as his headrest. Kanata then reminded her that they were in the middle of a lecture, but Haruka countered, asking him to chill, and then assured him that Teacher Baldi was too busy making out with his textbook to even notice us. After a moment of thought, Kanata finally caved and placed his head on her soft, inviting lap. With his head resting there, Haruka decided to give his overly rounded head a massage, which Kanata enjoyed, though he still found it impossible to sleep because his other head was on edge and refused to chill. Later, after the class ended that day while chilling in the sitting room, Kanata's phone rang. When he checked who was calling, he was shocked to realize it was none other than his nemesis, Natsuki. Annoyed to death, Kanata decided to ignore the call. But she kept calling until he had no choice but to pick up. As soon as he placed the phone to his ear, Natsuki wasted no time calling him a slow-brained fossil and demanded that next time he picked up his call on time. Ignoring her roasting, Kanata demanded to know why the heck she was calling. In reply, Natsuki dropped a bombshell, demanding to know what was going on between him and Haruto, sending Kanata's blood pressure to heights NASA could only dream of reaching. After a brief, awkward pause, Kanata stuttered some nonsense before demanding to know why she even cared. In response, Natsuki explained that she was worried a bottom feeder like him would infect Haruto with his broke boy energy. Dismissing her insult, Kanata told her that Haruka was having Wi-Fi troubles, so he was just helping out with it. Skeptically, Natsuki replied that she had never seen Haruka struggle with anything or ask for help from anyone. Feeling tense, Kanata decided to turn the interrogation around by asking Natsuki why she was even friends with Haruka. Natsuki replied by recalling how Haruka had always helped her with studies back in school. Natsuki further stated that she owed Haruka a lot, and because of that, she would never allow a roach-faced idiot like him to latch onto her. Following that, Natsuki asked Kanata if he knew where Haruka's real home was. Initially, Kanata thought she meant the fancy apartment Haruka lived in alone, but Natsuki clarified that she was referring to her parents' home. Before Kanata could respond, Natsuki sent him a link on his phone. When Kanata clicked it, he realized that Haruka's family was mad rich and owned a large hospital, with her father serving as both a doctor and the chairman of the board of directors. In light of this new information, Kanata finally understood why Haruka lived alone in a high-quality mansion and owned a luxurious black debit card with unlimited spending. Still, on the phone, Natsuki then assured Kanata that a $5 boy like him would never get close to a money-mint girl like Haruka. Frustrated, Kanata snapped, demanding to know why Natsuki hated him so much. Shouting over the phone, Natsuki simply declared that the reason was that his stupidity drove her crazy, and then she warned him never to lay a finger on Haruka before hanging up. Exhausted from the call, Kanata moved to the kitchen to get water, but that's when he bumped into Haruka, who asked if something was wrong. Kanata replied, saying he was sorry for being noisy, and then informed her that he had been on a call with Natsuki. Feeling jealous, Haruka asked if Kanata was friends with Natsuki or trying to get close to her, to which Kanata assured her that nothing like that was happening. Pressing further, Haruka demanded to know why Natsuki had called, and Kanata explained that she wanted to know about their relationship. Hearing this, Haruka's face lit up with excitement, hoping to hear something cute. But when Kanata revealed that he had told Natsuki he was just helping her with her troubles, the excitement immediately faded. Disappointedly, Haruka mentioned that she had wanted Kanata to say more than that. Confused by what she meant, Kanata pointed out that next time, he'd make the denial clearer by telling Natsuki they were just strangers. However, before he could finish, Haruka walked back to her room with a gloomy face, leaving Kanata even more puzzled about whether he'd said something wrong. Meanwhile, Haruka entered her room, pondering why Natsuki was poking into her supposed relationship with Kanata. Sitting by the window, she stared out at the city, and the thought of Kanata connecting with other girls filled her with jealousy. All she wanted was to be the only girl in Kanata's life, and though it might seem narrow-minded, she couldn't help but want to keep Kanata all to herself. The following week, Haruka received a call from Natsuki, who informed her that a viral TikTok trend was ongoing about people making desserts at home to cope with the current pandemic situation. Turning to Kanata, Haruka asked if he remembered that, while walking home from the grocery store earlier, she had promised to prepare a nice treat for him. With that in mind, Haruka proposed they go all out and make a massive pudding. Shortly after, Haruka announced that she had prepped all the ingredients for the pudding, and they were ready to get cooking. Kanata, meanwhile, was a little too caught up in the fact that they were in matching aprons, baking like some old married couple in a feel-good movie. Just as he was zoning out, Haruka snapped him back to reality by pointing out that, to start the baking, she would like to use the microwave to melt the gelatin, but she had no idea how to operate it and needed his guidance. Kanata instantly knew this was some premium-grade cap because, just moments ago, he had spotted her upstairs using the microwave like a pro. Nevertheless, Kanata decided to let her keep up the act and played along, mixing the gelatin with water, inserting it into the microwave, and then leaving it for 10 to 20 seconds. While doing this, Kanata noticed that Haruka was standing way too close for comfort, and when he asked why she was breathing down his neck, Haruka clearly stated that it was so she could learn how to use the microwave. But Kanata knew it was all a ruse but chose to keep quiet and not worry about it anymore. Moving on, Kanata got into his baking zone, mixing the gelatin like some chef master, while Haruka watched in awe as if he were crafting pure magic. Then, Kanata handed Haruka a bowl and told her to whisk the eggs and prep the caramel. Instead of doing that, Haruka decided to get lost in his eyes, staring at him like she wanted to see his soul. Realizing she had been caught slipping, Haruka immediately apologized for being useless. She then insisted on helping, so Kanata assigned her the easiest task, which was to pour the liquid mixture into the container, to which Haruka agreed enthusiastically, clearly proud of her contribution. Fast forward 24 hours, they decided to check on the pudding, and as they flipped it, they were amazed at how huge and jiggly it was. Kanata decided to play with the pudding and started shaking the plate to make the pudding wobble even more, which made Haruka laugh hard. Seeing Haruka giggling uncontrollably, Kanata couldn't help but join her, and together, they shared a good laugh. Haruka then tasted the pudding and was taken aback by how sweet it was. When Kanata commented on how big the pudding was and how they'd never finish it, Haruka suggested they put it in the freezer and eat it with ice cream later. Kanata agreed, but he mentioned how he wished they could host a party for people to taste the pudding, though the lockdown measures made it quite impossible. In response, Haruka shyly assured him that she was perfectly content spending time alone with him. Seeing how shocked Kanata was by this, Haruka decided to explain further, telling him that whenever she was alone with him, she felt like she could be herself. In addition, Haruka pointed out that whenever she was with Kanata, she felt like she had returned to her childhood and could let go of everything bothering her. While Kanata listened attentively, Haruka opened up about her childhood, revealing how she had lived alone with her grandparents since both her parents were always busy with work. Moreover, as a kid, whenever she saw other children spending quality time with their parents, she always felt jealous. Haruka revealed that as a kid, she had longed to ask about things she didn't understand, but she couldn't with her grandparents because of their ancient brains. Listening to Haruka talk about her childhood, Kanata was lost in thought, realizing he had been wrong to assume Haruka was an effortlessly perfect girl with zero baggage and no tragic backstory, but he was glad she had finally opened up to him. On the other hand, Haruka continued, saying that even though she respected her parents when she desperately wanted to be spoiled by someone, they weren't there, which was why, since she never really got spoiled as a kid, she had grown to love the way Kanata treated her. Hearing this touched Kanata deeply, and he vowed that spoiling Haruka would be his greatest honor, surprising Haruka, who asked if he was really okay with it, to which Kanata responded with a yes. With that, Haruka declared that they should spoil each other then, and she wasted no time leaning her head on Kanata's shoulder. At that moment, Kanata felt something shift inside him, and realized he might continue to learn more about Haruka if they stayed this close, and they might eventually grow even closer. After dinner that night, Kanata felt full and collapsed on the couch, slightly drowsy. However, just then, Haruka approached with a game console, suggesting they play a game before calling it a night, and Kanata agreed. Curious, Kanata asked if her tech disability affected her gaming, to which Haruka shyly admitted she was also terrible at games. Perplexed, Kanata then inquired why she bought the console if she struggled with games, and Haruka explained she kept it for when friends visited. So, gripping the gamepads, Kanata decided to teach Haruka how to play. But when she booted up the console, Kanata realized she had more games installed than a Twitch streamer with no job. Surprised, Kanata asked why she had so many games, and Haruka revealed she'd installed them a month ago, leading Kanata to suspect she'd planned this all along. Consequently, Kanata remarked that since she'd welcomed him into her home and treated him kindly, he'd love to know her next move. Haruka froze at the question, but before she could respond, Kanata blurted out that he meant he wanted to grow closer to her. In response, Haruka admitted that even though they barely vibed in class, she'd always wanted to get closer to him. Furthermore, Haruka explained she'd hoped that if they enjoyed gaming together, they'd start sharing interests. Kanata, in turn, confessed he also wanted to get closer, which thrilled Haruka, and she shared that his words made her genuinely happy. Following this heartfelt exchange, Kanata urged they keep gaming before things got too wholesome, and Haruka eagerly agreed. As they played, Kanata's perception of Haruka shifted. He realized she was more down to earth than he'd thought, and he liked her this way. After hours of gaming, Haruka announced she was going to bathe, and Kanata said he was fine with that. Yet, moments later, Haruka pulled a reverse Uno card, saying she had something urgent to attend to, and insisted Kanata shower first. Before he could question her, Haruka dashed to her room, urging him to just get into the bathroom. Kanata saw no issue with it, so he entered and started washing up. While scrubbing, Kanata reflected on their day, the pudding they'd made, the games they'd played, and how he'd learned more about Haruka. Suddenly, though, the bathroom door creaked, startling him. Before Kanata could investigate, he felt a finger trace his spine, and then Haruka flirtatiously asked what they should do next. Alarmed, Kanata demanded to know why Haruka was there after telling him to go first, and she cheekily replied that was exactly why she'd followed. Kanata pointed out he was unclad, with his millimeter Peter fully out, and then asked if Haruka was dressed. Smirking, Haruka said she was only rocking a towel and teased if he'd expected her to bathe in her Sunday dress. Frustrated, Kanata shouted for her to leave, given their mutual exposure, but Haruka told him to chill, assuring him her towel was secure. As Haruka caressed Kanata's back, Haruka declared she just wanted to get closer, while Kanata struggled to resist but ended up climaxing from her touch alone. Just then, Haruka emphasized she wanted to stick to him like glue, and Kanata, tense and aroused, demanded to know if Haruka really only had a towel on, but Haruka fell silent. Sternly, Kanata warned that even pranks have limits, and then demanded to know Haruka's true intentions while fighting his growing temptation. When Haruka assured him it wasn't a prank, Kanata questioned why she'd be comfortable barging in on a guy bathing. Confused, Haruka tried to explain but grew flustered, and suddenly, she slipped on the wet tiles, only for Kanata to turn and catch her before she plastered the floor. However, in that heroic moment, Haruka's towel decided to be the real hero by slipping off, revealing her glorious balloons and leaving Kanata in utter shock. Quickly, Kanata covered his eyes, but Haruka said it was fine before fleeing the bathroom in embarrassment. Watching Haruka leave the bathroom in shame, Kanata sank into his thoughts, wondering what to do next and how he'd face her afterwards. Meanwhile, Haruka, now showering, felt mortified for overstepping. Initially, she'd thought their heartfelt moment meant she could be daring to grow closer, but she hadn't anticipated this outcome. Regretting her haste, she worried she might have rushed it a little bit out of fear of losing him to other girls. Additionally, Haruka fretted over how she'd face Kanata, knowing he'd seen her entire assets in HD. Several days later, at the beginning of May, tension filled the house, and the vibe between Kanata and Haruka grew somewhat awkward following the bathroom incident. Even during their online class that day, they both maintained a stubborn silence toward each other. Kanata grew increasingly troubled by Haruka's habit of starting to say something only to abruptly stop mid-sentence. And moreover, she had been carefully avoiding any situation that might involve touching him, like toxic exes at a party. Kanata concluded that if this behavior persisted, living together would become nearly impossible. However, a few days after the bathroom incident, news broke that the nationwide lockdown might soon be lifted. Additionally, the school WhatsApp group announced that with the lockdown ending, physical classes could resume, and the dorms would reopen as well. In light of this update, Kanata told Haruka he planned to move back to the dorm once it reopened, leaving her visibly stunned. Noticing Haruka's shocked expression, Kanata gently reminded her that surely she didn't expect him to be her permanent roommate, though immediately after, he noticed she looked like she was about to faint. When Kanata pressed her to explain what was wrong, Haruka admitted she felt exhausted. Concerned, Kanata suggested she might have a fever and urged her to check her temperature. Haruka complied, and the thermometer read 37 degrees Celsius, confirming she indeed had a fever. With that, Kanata proposed she lie down while he prepared dinner, to which Haruka agreed. As Kanata scrolled through his phone, he wondered whether Haruka had a simple cold or if she might have contracted the virus. Shortly afterwards, Kanata finished cooking and brought the food to Haruka's room. Just as he stepped inside, Haruka panicked and quickly asked him to wait while she put on a mask. But Kanata reassured her there was no need since, if she had the virus, he'd likely caught it already. Haruka thanked him for the meal and then inquired about his own health, but Kanata insisted she focus on recovering instead of worrying about him. Suddenly, Haruka complained that her pajamas felt sticky from excessive sweating, prompting Kanata to suggest she bathe and change. However, when Haruka teased that she'd only bathe if he joined her, Kanata firmly declined, leading Haruka to snap that she'd bathe alone then. Later, Kanata returned with towels and fresh clothes for Haruka, only to find she'd fallen asleep without bathing, so he decided to wipe her down himself. Yet, he hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate to touch a girl's body without consent. Nevertheless, seeing her sweating worse than a sinner in church, Kanata resolved to proceed. He began by removing the blanket, but nearly lost all his IQ points when he saw Narita's plumpy melons half exposed. Still, with determination, Kanata started wiping her sweaty face. From there, Kanata cautiously moved to her neck and then her chest, where he practically lost a few brain cells. After the cleanup, Kanata changed her clothes with his virgin eyes practically shut and dipped from the room before he could lose his dang mind. Once outside, Kanata pondered whether Haruka had truly caught the virus. But the issue was that no nearby hospitals were accepting patients with fevers for testing. Even after calling a clinic, they responded dismissively, advising him to quarantine and stay put. Kanata found it strange that no hospitals were taking patients, especially since the news claimed the city was now safe and the lockdown had lifted. Hours later that day, Kanata checked on Haruka again, and she reported feeling the same, still tired and sleepy. When Kanata suggested notifying her family about her illness, Haruka flatly refused, explaining she didn't want to worry them. Kanata countered that keeping her family in the dark was even more worrisome. To emphasize his point, Kanata noted that her father, a doctor, was ideally suited to help. But Haruka sadly replied she didn't want to burden her old man, leaving Kanata wondering if her dad prioritized work over his own daughter. Realizing he couldn't convince her, Kanata apologized for insisting, admitting he should have minded his own business. Just as he turned to leave, Haruka stopped him, confessing that if her father chose his work over her, then she would hate him forever, and that was what she was scared of. Outside her room, Kanata reasoned that despite Haruka's objections, contacting her parents was still the best option. However, he also realized that while caring for her, he shouldn't be the one wiping her body. That task belonged to someone she deeply trusted. The first person who came to mind was their teacher, but he dismissed the idea, knowing the lady was nosy as funk and would definitely snitch to Haruka's parents. Ultimately, Kanata faced the difficult choice of calling Natsuki, the resident witch, though involving her could still mess up his relationship with Haruka. Kanata called Natsuki, and given the situation, he decided to honestly reveal everything to her, including the fact that he had been staying at Haruka's place. At that moment, Kanata felt certain that Natsuki would be furious upon learning her best friend had been sharing her flat with someone she despised. However, Natsuki simply informed him that she was coming over. When Kanata asked if she wasn't afraid of getting infected by leaving her house, Natsuki retorted that she would never allow a brain-dead squirrel like him to handle such a delicate situation. A few hours later, Natsuki arrived at the house and immediately demanded to know where Haruka was, to which Kanata replied that she was lying in her room. Without hesitation, Natsuki marched into Haruka's room and discovered her lying with her chest in pay-per-view mode, prompting her to snap at Kanata, questioning why he had kept her at the house after seeing her in that condition. Stepping outside Haruka's room, Natsuki declared to Kanata that she would stay over to properly care for Haruka. In response, Kanata thanked her and then added that he would be relinquishing his duties to her. Stunned, Natsuki demanded to know what he meant by that, and Kanata explained that he would search for hospitals that might admit Haruka. Natsuki countered that Haruka might not even have the virus and warned that if Kanata went out looking for a hospital, he might be the one to bring the virus into the house. Nevertheless, Kanata responded that it might not matter since he would be leaving the house entirely, leaving Natsuki utterly shocked. In his mind, Kanata reasoned that staying in the house might only hinder Natsuki, and besides, once Haruka recovered, she would likely resume tormenting him. Back in the present, Kanata fibbed that his reason for leaving was to ensure Haruka could get as much rest as possible. When Natsuki pressed him about where he would stay since the dorms weren't yet open, Kanata assured her he would manage somehow, noting that the dorms would open the following week, so he would simply crash in the park. Probing further, Natsuki asked what would happen to his online classes, to which Kanata replied that he wouldn't participate until the dorms opened. Nevertheless, Kanata promised Natsuki he would relentlessly search for a hospital to admit Haruka, and would certainly inform her if he found one. Additionally, Kanata urged Natsuki to call him if any emergency arose, vowing to assist with anything needed. As Natsuki listened in amazement, Kanata revealed that he owed Haruka a great deal. For instance, Kanata explained that it was thanks to Haruka he wasn't sleeping in the park like some hobo. He elaborated that Haruka had lifted him from his lowest point, providing a nice home, a warm bed, and good food, and had stood by him throughout the entire month they spent together. Shortly afterwards, Kanata told Natsuki he had packed his bag, cleaned his room, and was ready to leave. Bowing in gratitude, Kanata reminded Natsuki that he had entrusted Haruka to her care and then bid her goodbye. Venturing into the city, Kanata grew frustrated after searching all the hospitals in the vicinity and still finding no one willing to admit Haruka. Every facility he visited had posted notices on their walls stating they weren't accepting new patients, especially not those with high fevers. After searching all day with no success, Kanata resolved to spend the night on a park bench. Just as he wondered how Haruka was faring and whether he should call Natsuki to check on her, he received a message from Natsuki informing him that Haruka had been admitted to her family's hospital. This news filled Kanata with immense joy, though he couldn't fathom how Natsuki had convinced Haruka to tell her family about her condition. Feeling greatly relieved by the update, Kanata decided to crash in the park for 3 days, where the only people he encountered were those walking their dogs. Fortunately, no rain fell during those 3 days, but the hardship was that Kanata grew exhausted. The hard wooden bench made it impossible for him to get a single night's rest. Thus, on the morning of the 4th day, Kanata chose not to wake up, but to keep sleeping since his entire body ached. Yet he realized he had to endure 3 more days until the dorms opened. Suddenly, a healthy-looking Haruka appeared out of nowhere, declaring that she had caught him. When Kanata opened his eyes in disbelief, he froze in shock to see Haruka gazing into his eyes with a suspicious expression. Would Haruko get to know that Kanata knew all along about her little lie? Comment, Lockdown Lovers, if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.